Hello, my name is Matt Reardon, and thanks for watching this Wednesday evening, April 19th, West Weather Update brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. To start, we're looking at more incredible satellite imagery of these low-pressure systems that have moved in to the west coast of the United States. We've looked at imagery like this, it feels like all year, or all spring certainly, across the western U.S. This system spinning up, impacting Oregon and Washington. This was Monday, April 17th, really Monday evening, ending the day there. You can see that sunset line come across right as it gets toward the coast of Washington and Oregon. We saw a number of these loops impacting parts of California. San Francisco got a few, all the way through Los Angeles got their share of them when that atmospheric river event sequence was impacting the state of California. Over the last few weeks, that activity or that focus has shifted north up into the Pacific Northwest. And if we look just over the last 14 days of anomalous precipitation for the Pacific Northwest, I think we can see that standing out on this map. Parts of coastal Oregon, the Willamette Valley, Washington receiving more precipitation as that pattern has shifted out of California, leaving them dry finally. They're getting a break from the precipitation, which they desperately needed. They've certainly seen enough for the year of 2023 with the amount of rain they've had, the snowpack that we've talked about extensively, and unfortunately, the inclement weather in terms of flooding, mudslides, rock slides, and then that flooding risk. I think we're going to have to continue to talk about that and watch that despite the drier weather, and we'll talk about that as we get toward the end of the video. But nonetheless, it's been active for the Pacific Northwest. If we jump around to some of these cities specifically to get an idea of their weather story this year, this is looking at year-to-date precipitation for Salem, Oregon, and the Willamette Valley of Oregon. That curved black line here going through the middle of the graph, that's your year-to-date normal precipitation accumulation in a given year. This year we're beneath that. That yellow shading kind of showing you how far you're differing from average. Started the year dry when all the activity was down in California, but over the last few weeks, these individual rainfall events here in purple have brought us closer really to about average for the year in 2023. And it's a similar story if we jump over to Boise, Idaho in the western Snake River Valley. Drier to start the year. We've shifted activity up into the Pacific Northwest. They get some of that remnant precipitation coming east across those elevation, and we've shifted closer to average for Boise, Idaho. Unfortunately, if you jump over to parts of Washington, depending on where exactly you are in that rain shadow, this being Walla Walla, Washington, dry to start the year. We have been wetter over the last few weeks. You'll notice those precipitation events over the last 3 to 4 weeks, working us closer to average, but not quite to the same degree as some of those other cities that we looked at. Now, I do want to jump over to cover really quickly Hawaii. They are in the western United States, just well off the west coast out in the central Pacific. They've had a very active weather day today. I just wanted to mention flood watches out for many of the eastern islands here. You can see the cloud cover, heavy rain showers impacting the big island of Hawaii there, Maui, getting quite a bit of precipitation. Molokai saw quite a bit of precipitation a few hours ago. And this cold front, Pacific cold front, you'll notice it in this cloud field here, making its way across the state, relieving the western islands from some of the heaviest precipitation that has now shifted east. But nonetheless, a busy day underway in Hawaii, where they've had a number of these busy days in terms of precipitation and flooding concerns. Hawaii is a state that gets quite a bit of rainfall, but in a kind of predictable geographic fashion. This has been regardless of whether you're on the windward or leeward side, much of the islands seeing concerning levels of rain to the point where they're issuing flood watches and flood advisories still for the eastern islands here. If we shift back to the continental western United States, looking at the all hazards map, not too much going on west of the divide. We see the red flag warnings for New Mexico, Texas, that's for fire danger there. Some winter weather advisories for eastern Montana, but shifting west, some lingering winter weather advisories in the Cascades as some light snow makes it through the area here. Freeze warnings in select spots in eastern Washington, northeast Oregon, and then some of the inland near the coast of Northern California, the north coast there. If we look tomorrow morning at those temperatures across the Pacific Northwest, staying above freezing is the current thinking for the forecast tomorrow morning in the Willamette Valley. That light blue color being mid-30s. When you get into the salmon or red color here, I suppose salmon being relevant of a color for the Pacific Northwest rivers, but this nonetheless, the salmon color signifying when you're dropping below that 32 degree Fahrenheit measure. And you'll notice the river valley's staying above freezing, but when you shift inland into the upper elevations, not too far into the elevation, you're getting below freezing, prompting some of those freeze warnings near an area, for example, like Pendleton, Oregon down here, 30 degrees Fahrenheit forecast for tomorrow morning. Now, looking out into the forecast over the next week or so, I'll make this valid as a Wednesday evening here at the filming of this video. There's those light snow showers prompting the winter weather advisories for the Cascades. If I take this through the evening here Wednesday into Thursday morning, you'll notice that system clearing out very quickly, wasn't very strong to begin with, being replaced Thursday p.m. by another rainmaker for the Pacific Northwest. This one more of the glancing blow impacting parts of Oregon, parts of Washington with additional precipitation. I don't think it'll be too heavy, but potentially moderate snowfall getting into the Cascades here. Precipitation, rainfall moving into the Willamette Valley, parts of eastern Washington. Not expecting moderate to significant or heavy precipitation out of this. For the river valleys here, going through Washington and Oregon and then into Idaho early Friday, makes its way through the area on Friday out across the Continental Divide to the point where really early Saturday we set up a rather uneventful day across the west getting into Saturday, save for parts of far northwest Washington. As we go through Saturday evening, keeping the west mostly clear of weather events, again, save for parts of Washington. And as we go through the day Sunday, perhaps another rainmaker moving through parts of Oregon, Washington, and eastern Washington through the Sunday p.m. time frame. That's really the beginning of a slow-moving system. You can see they're coming closer to British Columbia, closer to northwest Washington here on Sunday evening, which takes its time working through the state, I think over Sunday evening into Monday, all the way into early Tuesday. I'll just play this quickly through. Here's looking at Sunday p.m. through Sunday evening into Monday proper, Monday afternoon, kind of centered over eastern Oregon, getting into Idaho, to the point if I take this all the way into early Tuesday, only now is the system trying to exit the region, impacting parts of Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado. So it could be something of a 2 to 3 day weather maker, but not looking particularly strong. Not expecting extreme rainfall or snowfall amounts out of the system, just going to keep that kind of soggy, cool pattern around, unfortunately, for the next 6 to 7 days or so as a result of some of these kind of quick weather makers moving through the Pacific Northwest. Not terribly different from what we've seen over the last 14 days. If we look at the precipitation anomalies over the next 7 days, I think you can see that not expecting extreme amounts in terms of precipitation, slightly above average for parts of Washington and Oregon, closer to average for parts of Idaho, at least the Snake River Valley proper. California, Nevada, staying largely dry, a continuation of that pattern, that shift toward the northwest that we've seen with the focus of those systems. Temperatures over that same time period underneath the clouds, the rain, those low pressure systems bringing those cold fronts through. We'd expect those cooler temperatures to continue. We see that here looking at temperature anomalies over the next 7 days. Really the only areas of the western U.S. avoiding cooler temperatures would be Southern California, perhaps parts of the Central Valley trending closer to seasonal, and Southern Arizona. If we want to look beyond that, all the way out to, let's say, the end of April, we really have to look at the upper level height pattern or the jet stream across the Pacific. This is something we look at fairly often. We're trying to forecast in that 1 to 2 week time frame. And if you remember all the way out last week, we looked at the difference between the ECMWF and GFS. And I'll quickly try to show you an example of something we were looking at. We saw this upper level ridge really in between Alaska and Russia. They call this the Chukchi Sea up here. That was helping to promote active weather across the Pacific Northwest. And if I change the color here to make this a little bit more obvious, this upper level ridge in the jet stream fell into a trough across the Gulf of Alaska. That helped to promote flow and activity across Oregon and Washington. You can really see it here in the jet stream, pushing these low pressure systems, fueling those across the Pacific Northwest. This being valid as of tonight. So not a surprise to see in the forecast more of these low pressure systems over the next 5 to 7 days or so. But you'll notice as I take this forecast out toward next week, that upper level ridge that was in the Chukchi Sea, kind of right in between Alaska and Russia, is now shifting off to the northwest, really into the Arctic Ocean proper. And as it does that, it allows that troughing that was fueling those low pressure systems in the Pacific Northwest to erode into and be replaced by an upper level ridge. So at the beginning of this forecast, really on April 20th, this evening, that ridge was here. It has exited the area off into the Arctic Ocean, and this troughiness that was in the Gulf of Alaska has now itself been replaced in this forecast from the GFS by a large ridge in the jet stream. Ridges in the jet stream promote drier weather, all else equal, and warmer weather underneath them. So this forecast for the Pacific Northwest, for California, for Nevada, perhaps even Idaho, is looking, at least if the GFS is correct, drier and warmer. So there's something of a bigger pattern shift that we haven't seen in quite some time, at least for the Pacific Northwest, all the way out here on April 29th. Now, this is just one forecast, and we're looking out 9 days. What does the ECMWF say in comparison to that? If we just jump over and look at the ECMWF, same time frame, we see a similar forecast agreement. Now, it doesn't look the exact same, but you could certainly still draw a large upper-level ridge across the western United States, expecting drier and warmer weather underneath that. Now, something I will note on this forecast that's catching my eye, this little upper-level low just off the coast of California. More so on the ECMWF forecast versus the GFS. This one getting, not concerningly, but certainly closer to the central coast or the southern coast of California. Could be a precipitation maker at the end of April, something to keep an eye on. Wouldn't be this kind of huge, powerful news-breaking atmospheric river event. Just something of a precipitation maker, and one maybe on the warmer side in terms of temperature impacting California. So a notable pattern shift as we get into the end of April. Quite a ways out in the forecast, but there is agreement between the GFS and the ECMWF. That tends to increase our forecast confidence for that same time period. If we look at temperature and precipitation anomalies across that week, kind of ending May, called April 26th through May 2nd, this is the precipitation anomalies over that same time frame. Not a surprise underneath that ridge, the ECMWF, drier across the west, shifting drier across Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, an area that has been very active in terms of precipitation and cooler weather. What about temperatures? Same time period, end of April, early May, warmer temperatures finally making their way into the west region proper or as a whole. Now, we talked about this potentially being a concern for the snowpack. We've seen above average snowpack across the west, breaking records in Utah, breaking records across the Sierra Nevadas. This would be a concern in terms of starting more of that snow melt, parts of the upper Colorado River Basin. Seeing quite a bit of snowpack there, expecting water levels to increase in Lake Powell and Lake Mead if this forecast comes to fruition. Still concerned about that flooding risk for the San Joaquin Valley as a result of that record snowpack having few places to go as we warm up these temperatures and start melting that snow. Now, what I will say, this isn't as extreme of a heat wave, at least right now. You'll just notice that looking at this color bar, we're on the warmer side, but we could be quite a bit warmer. But we are a ways out, so this is something of a concern now, and that we're starting to get warmer temperatures into the area, and we haven't really seen a strong warm-up yet. More snowpack melting is coming. We'll have to watch this closely over the next 10 days, especially if this forecast trends higher with more confidence or higher temperatures. Now, the Climate Prediction Center, the National Weather Service, their 6 to 10 day forecast shows agreement here. This is looking at April 25th through the 29th. So starting that kind of last week of April, warmer across much of the western U.S., California, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, parts of Idaho, parts of Utah, Arizona. Drier across some of those same areas. Not a surprise that if we situate that area underneath an upper level ridge in the jet stream, warmer and drier are going to be that forecast. 8 to 14 days, looking out really through the end of April into early May. Similar forecast, warmer for parts of the west, drier for the Pacific Northwest, but you'll notice that little bullseye there in California. I think that's the Climate Prediction Center and the National Weather Service, very good at their jobs forecasting that upper level low, potentially impacting parts of central California as a rainmaker, but not a huge weather event, just something of an anomalous rainmaker, potentially around the turn of the month. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Beyond that, getting into May, we are still seeing these cold ocean waters off the west coast of the United States. A week ago, I thought that these might win the battle in terms of that pattern shift, in the sense that they would keep temperatures on the cooler side in the upper levels in terms of keeping that troughiness around. We didn't quite see that. We saw now potentially that pattern shift working its way, ridging into the area, bringing that pattern shift we just talked about in terms of temperatures. But this is still a powerful influence. And I think as we get into May, if these water temperatures remain as cool, we could promote a shift back into the current pattern that we're seeing over the next 6 days. So that would be cooler across the Pacific Northwest and active across the Pacific Northwest. That's just one forecast, just based on the colder water temperatures here. I have low confidence in that forecast right now. It could be that we continue that warmer pattern early in May. Just not clear which way we're going to go. If I had to guess, I would guess these cooler waters are going to win out and we shift back towards something toward a cooler pattern across the west. We don't warm up too much in terms of that snowpack, and we try to level off the snowpack and the flooding concerns in that regard. Something else I'm seeing, looking at the sea surface temperatures anomaly, valid as of Wednesday here, April 18th. If we look down in the central tropical Pacific, warmer ocean temperatures moving in across the equator. You can really see those spiking off the west coast of South America, where the term El Nino was coined. Here's that El Nino trying to develop in the equatorial Pacific. Very weak signature right now, but nonetheless, these waters are warmer rather than cooler, certainly well beyond the La Nina we saw earlier this year. And if we look to those forecasts all the way into summer of 2023, we've looked at forecast bar graphs like this before. The probabilities have shifted, I would argue, significantly higher just in the last few weeks here. These forecast models coming into better agreement that we very likely will see El Nino conditions develop this summer in the Pacific. And really just based on this map I just showed you, we're almost starting to see that development occur right now, and it's only late April here. So probability is now up to 80 to close to 90% getting into July, August, and September. You can see the month pairings at the bottom here. El Nino conditions becoming increasingly likely in the Pacific Ocean in 2023. The probabilities have increased even through next winter. You'll notice if we go all the way to the right side of the graph here, November, December, January, February. Probabilities earlier, a few weeks ago, were down closer to 50 to 60% into retaining that El Nino state through next winter. Those probabilities now up over 70%. And if we remain in that El Nino through next winter, the influence typically brings in a wetter year for California, the Sierra Nevada, areas south of there as well. So that's something we're going to watch closely. As far as El Nino developing this summer, could delay the start to our monsoon season in the desert southwest. So a slower or a weaker monsoon season potentially in that area. And we could see warmer temperatures in the west coast of the United States. That could become a problem in terms of wildfire. We've talked about that a little bit this year. New growth expected this year as a result of all the rainfall, and the anomalous water across the western region promotes new growth. If we warm up temperatures, we get something of a flash drought later in the year. You potentially have the kindling and the conditions ripe for wildfires. Too early to talk details right now, just kind of a background risk we'll keep an eye on as we end summer of 2023 and pick up our wildfire season. That is all I have for you all this evening. Thank you for watching.